Why do so many Brazilians want to leave Brazil and move to another country? I just don't get it. I mean, I think Brazil is a great country. It's got beautiful nature, really nice beaches, and also a lot of things are cheaper here compared to Europe and the US. So buying a house, for example, renting a house, a lot of food in the supermarket is cheaper as well. And also services like a cleaner, a handyman, a plumber, they're a lot cheaper as well here in Brazil. And also other things like the people here in general are very friendly, very open, very welcoming. And then the climate is also a lot better here compared to many parts of Europe and the US. It's a lot sunnier, a lot warmer. So I mean, I think Brazil is great. And when I arrived here, I was a bit confused about why so many people said that they wanted to leave Brazil. And obviously, not all Brazilians want to leave, but my impression is a large proportion want to. And one of the ways I know that so many want to leave Brazil is that I hear it all the time when I talk to Brazilians. So when I meet someone new, around town or somewhere, a very common conversation I have with them goes something like this. So I say "Oi, tudo bem," which means "Hi, how are you?" And just by saying those few words, the other person immediately knows that I'm not Brazilian. So then they usually ask where I'm from. A lot of the time they ask, "Are you American?" I'm not sure why, but a lot of the time they ask that, and I say no, I'm Swedish. And then they ask, why did you move to Brazil and leave such a great developed country like Sweden? And then a lot say that, oh, it's their dream to live overseas and leave Brazil. These countries like Sweden and so on are so much better. And I usually reply saying, yeah, no, Sweden's a great country, but it has a lot of problems as well. And I actually think Brazil is a great country, and I actually prefer living here in Brazil than in Sweden. And usually the other person just gives a very confused look and doesn't understand at all what I'm saying. Also, it's not just my conversations with people. There's also lots of newspaper articles and reports which show that lots of Brazilians are moving overseas or want to move overseas. So there are many articles like this saying that the number of Brazilians moving overseas is increasing. And estimates are there are nearly 5 million Brazilians living overseas now, which is a lot. And you can see in the graphics here that back in 2012-13, the number of Brazilians living overseas actually declined. And one of the reasons for that was that the Brazilian economy was doing really well and was very strong. But then after that, you can see that the numbers just increased year after year of the number of Brazilians leaving Brazil and living overseas. And one of the reasons for that was the Brazilian economy starting to weaken, but obviously many other factors as well, which I'll discuss a bit later. And the key countries where Brazilians are moving to are the States and Europe. So you can see here that 45% of Brazilians moving overseas went to the States and 32% to Europe. Now, a lot of Brazilians, they're quite fortunate, so they have dual nationality. So a lot of Brazilians who have connections to Italy, Germany, Portugal, because of their ancestors, they managed to get passports. So then they can easily move to Europe and work and live there without needing a visa. And then many other Brazilians who don't have dual nationality have been able to move overseas because of their profession and other countries wanting to attract these professions and offering visas. I know Canada was doing that, and lots of doctors and engineers and other professions were able to move there and get a visa. And then obviously you've got also many moving overseas without having the proper visas. And yeah, it's difficult to find any stats on how many moved overseas like that. I found one article that said that in the US they thought that there was about 200,000 Brazilians living in the US without the proper visas. So I mean, that number I mentioned earlier of nearly 5 million Brazilians living overseas, that's just the ones with a visa. If you include the ones that have moved without a visa, then that number will be even higher. Now, at the beginning when I moved to Brazil, I struggled to understand why so many Brazilians wanted to leave Brazil and live overseas. But now, as I've lived here many years, I've now started to understand the reasons why. And there are many reasons, but one of the key ones is that Brazilians see the US and Europe as offering more opportunities for a better life. So that includes finding a better job and also a job that pays more. And it's true that in some parts in the States and some countries in Europe, it's easier to find work, and also these jobs pay higher salaries. So if we just look at average earnings, so in Brazil, that is $9,000 per year. And if we compare that to US, it's $80,000, and in the UK, it's $47,000. So you can see a big difference in average earnings. And then if we look at some specific jobs, so an accountant, so the average salaries for an accountant in the US is $59,000 per year. And if we compare that to Brazil, it's 64,000 reais, not dollars, which converts to $12,000. So $59,000 for an accountant in the US, $12,000 in Brazil. And if we look at a teacher, so in the teacher in the US, average salary is $52,000. And in Brazil, it is 60,000 reais, which is $11,000. So the salaries for these two professions are about 5 times as high in the US compared to Brazil. But you can't just look at salaries, you also have to look at the cost of living, because if the cost of living is lower, then that kind of compensates a bit. So yeah, a lot of things here in Brazil are cheaper. So like I mentioned earlier, in terms of buying a house, renting a house, some groceries as well, and services. A lot of these things are cheaper, but there are other things which aren't cheaper and actually more expensive in Brazil. So I would say cars, domestic appliances, electronics. A lot of these things are actually more expensive in Brazil compared to the States and Europe. So yeah, the cost of living in Brazil definitely isn't 5 times lower than the US, which is what it would need to be so that Brazilians have the same standard of living as people in the States and in Europe. So the fortunate thing is that Brazilians can't buy the same things and don't have the same standard of living. Now saying that, there are some professions in Brazil where people earn very well. So obviously you've got directors of big companies, a lot of government workers as well earn very well, as well farmers as well. Farmers here in Brazil can be very wealthy compared to Europe, where in general farmers do not earn well. But here in Brazil, if you're a farmer with a big farm, then you can earn some good money. So yeah, it's definitely not the case that all Brazilians earn low salaries. And also you have to remember that even though salaries are higher in the States and Europe, that doesn't mean that there aren't many families struggling to make ends meet with the constant increase in the cost of living. So it isn't easy also for many people in Europe and the States. And also another thing is that anyone who earns in dollars and euros and lives in Brazil, they can also have a very comfortable life. And I've done some videos about this, geo arbitrage, where you earn in the States or Europe in euros or dollars, but then you live in Brazil where the cost of living is lower, and then you can have a very comfortable life. And another reason why many Brazilians want to move overseas is crime. So Brazil has a relatively high crime rate compared to the States and Europe. So if we look at homicide rates, for example, so in Brazil it's around 17, 18 homicides per 100,000. If you compare that to the States, where it's around 6, and the homicide rate in Sweden is around 1, although it is increasing a bit. But homicides is just one crime. In Brazil, you've got many other crimes which are very common. So muggings and carjackings are very common, especially in the big cities. However, if you live in the smaller towns in the countryside in Brazil, these can be very safe, just as safe as living in Sweden, with very little crime. And this is what I do. So, I mean, where I live, you can walk at nighttime without any problems. You can walk around talking on your mobile. You won't have any problems at all. The problem is that in these smaller towns, there aren't many job opportunities. So for a lot of people, they have to live in the cities because that's where you can get a job. So again, if you're not dependent on having a job, then you can live in these smaller cities and you can have a very safe and calm life here. But one thing I would say is that crime levels are increasing in the States and in Europe as well. For me personally, talking about Sweden, crime rates there are increasing a lot. There's a lot more violent crime, and the Swedish police are struggling a bit to control this. because they just haven't had that much experience of this amount of crime before. So I don't think if things are perfect overseas, there are some problems there as well. Now, a third reason that many Brazilians say to me about why they want to move overseas is because of the politics and the corruption. Now, on this channel, I don't talk about politics. I mean, I personally am not interested at all in politics. I mean, I vote in the elections, but that's about it. But many people, they get very worked up about the wrong political party being in power, and also the amount of corruption as well. And it's true that corruption here in Brazil is higher. So I found this stat here that corruption in Brazil is 0.4 compared to corruption levels in the US, which is 0.05, and in Sweden it's 0.01. Obviously, I'm not sure how they calculated this, and it must be very subjective, but it does indicate that corruption is a bit higher here in Brazil. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that that's the case, because it means that a lot of the money that you pay in taxes doesn't go to improving the country, the infrastructure, schools and hospitals. It kind of gets wasted. But what I would say is that, I mean, I'm hopeful that this should improve over time. I mean, I couldn't find any stats about whether levels of corruption are decreasing or not. But what I would say is that if you choose a smaller town in the countryside in Brazil, then you're probably less affected by it, because then the local residents of the town have more kind of oversight and control over the local government. And also, if you choose a town which has a bit of a more European culture, so here in the south you had many German immigrants that moved over many years ago, but the towns still have quite a strong German culture. I just find these towns a lot more organized, the infrastructure is better, and in a lot of them the local governments as well are a bit more responsible. I mean, it's not the case for all of them, but that's kind of the impression I got. And finally, another reason Brazilians give why they want to move overseas is that they don't like the climate here in Brazil. They feel it's too hot in summertime, and they want to move to countries where the climate's a bit cooler. Now, I'm the opposite. I hate the cold. I prefer the heat, which is probably because I've spent a large part of my life in countries where they've got, long winters, which are cold, and lots of snow. I just find it so much easier living in a country with long, hot summers. It's just simpler in terms of you don't need to wear so many clothes. You can enjoy your evenings after work outside. You can do more sports and activities outside as well. You can enjoy the beaches as well for a longer period because the summers are long. So yeah, I like the hot climate. But yeah, I agree that sometimes it gets super hot, so over 40 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, on those days, you just kind of stay indoors and switch on the air conditioning. And yeah, if I had a normal job where I had to wear a suit and travel to an office every day during this heat, yeah, I'd probably hate it as well. But if you're able to work from home and you can sit with just shorts and t-shirts and crank up the air conditioning, then yeah, for me, I have no issues. And there are many other reasons as well why Brazilians want to leave Brazil. I mean, everyone's different. So I just wanted to do this video to say that, I moved to Brazil and I love it here. But then there are many people who want to do the opposite and are trying to do everything to leave it. And I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. Everyone has their individual circumstances. And for some, moving overseas will be the right thing, while for others, they'll move overseas and then realize that actually no, the grass isn't greener overseas. It's actually better back home. And then finally, I know many friends and family in Sweden, in the States, in the UK, which were saying the same thing, that they wish they could leave the country they're living in and going overseas. So I think overall, it's pretty common for people thinking that where they are currently isn't very good and it's better overseas. So I hope you like this video. Please leave a like, subscribe. If you've got any questions or anything, leave it in the commentary below. So thanks for watching. Until next time.